Have you ever been in a situation where you know that life needs to change? You know that things aren't working the way that they are, but you just don't know how. You don't know what to do. You feel entirely stuck. That is what we're going to talk about today. My name is Christine Wood, and this is the Living with Margins podcast, episode number 12. When I was a kid, we used to play a game called Stuck in the Mud. It was a variation of Tiggy, where if you got caught or if you got tagged, you had to stand still until someone else came and scrambled underneath your legs, and then you were free to run around again. Now, I was a terrible runner, so I always spent most of the game standing still with my legs wide apart, yelling at my friends to come and set me free. I was completely stuck. And this, of course, is just a silly childhood game. But how often do we as adults find ourselves in a life situation and it just feels like we have no options? It feels like we're completely stuck. It's not a great feeling. I had my 3 kids really close together. So there is 3 years and 5 months in between the oldest and the youngest, and one in the middle. So those early years were absolutely relentless. It was so busy. It felt like I was just stuck on this treadmill of never ending, cooking and cleaning and doing laundry and comforting fussy babies and trying to occupy inquisitive toddlers. And during those years, Murray and I only had one car. We had one family car. So most of the time, I was quite literally stuck at home with these babies. And I know that that was a really blessed time. And I was really grateful to be in that situation where I had 3 healthy babies and I could stay home and be their primary carer for those early years. But it was still really hard. I have never known tiredness the way that I felt tired caring for my 3 young children in those early years. It was full on and exhausting. But soon enough, my children grew up. We bought a second car so that I could run errands and do other things while the kids were at school. I could pursue other interests and get some freedom back. And then before I knew it, the kids had their own cars and they had their own jobs and their own independent lives. And now our nest is empty, and that whole season of the relentless demands of caring for children is completely finished. While that season was difficult, it didn't last forever. And God brought me through that season, helped me to persevere by giving me the strength that I needed day by day just to keep being a good mum and to just hang in there one day at a time. And the season came to an end. But sometimes the situations that we find ourselves stuck in are not things that the season will change and we automatically grow out of that time. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck in circumstances where it actually takes us to do something brave and make a big change to get ourselves unstuck. I remember a few years ago now, I was invited back to our old church for a special celebration service for our pastor who was retiring. And it was lovely to go back. I hadn't been for 15 years, and I was able to catch up with people that had been really close friends and had lost touch with them. So it was so lovely to go back and catch up with them and just see how the kids have grown and people have got married and had kids and graduated and got jobs and all of the wonderful things that happen over 15 years. And that was really inspiring and encouraging, and I loved doing that. But there was also some really discouraging conversations that I had where I talked to people and the things that they were with their lives were exactly the same things that they had been struggling with 15 years prior. Nothing had changed. So the difficult family relationships, the difficult job situations, the length of their commute, the unsuitable house, whatever it was that they were struggling with, they were still in the same place 15 years later. And that was really hard for me to hear. And that was really discouraging because even life feels like we have no options and we have nowhere to go. I know that we serve a God who is in the business of making a way where there is no way. There are examples all through the Bible of how God makes a way when there is no apparent way. You think of Daniel, think of Joshua, think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, think of all of these heroes of the Bible where God made a way where their situation seemed absolutely hopeless. But the very best example is one of my Bible heroes, and that is Moses. So God used Moses to rescue his people out of slavery in Egypt. And God did this in a miraculous way. So he sent the plagues, he brought the people out, he made a path on dry land through the Red Sea for the people to walk through with walls of water on either side to escape from the Egyptians. And then the water came in and drowned their enemies, and the people were saved. And they were heading to the promised land that God had promised them, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of freedom for them. And so we see God bring them out. And just a few months later, they get to the edge of the promised land. And Moses appoints 12 spies to go into the promised land to scope it out, to see what it's like, to build a strategy of how to go in and take possession of the land that God promised them. And Moses sent 12 spies to go in and look at the land. And when they came back to give their report, 2 of the spies said, "Yeah, the land is fantastic. God has promised us a good land flowing with milk and honey." But 10 of the spies said, "Yes, it's a good land, but the enemies there are too strong. We will never be able to defeat them. We should just go back to Egypt." They didn't have the faith to take possession of the land that God promised them. Even after everything that God had done, they didn't have faith to believe that God could lead them into the land that he promised. And so what happened? They spent 40 years wandering around in the desert, waiting for that whole generation to die until their children could go in and take possession of the land that God had promised. 40 years of wandering. What a terrible tragedy. 40 years is an awfully long time. Like, what were you doing 40 years ago? I was still in high school 40 years ago. 40 years is a lifetime. It is such a long time. And what a tragedy for God's people to waste 40 years wandering in the desert, not able to take possession of the promised land. And here's the thing. So often for us to get to where God has promised us, we also have to go through a season of wilderness and sometimes even a battle. And that always takes faith. It always takes courage. It always pushes us way out of our comfort zone so that we can move out of a place of being stuck and into the place that God has promised for us. There's 3 things that I really notice about the people of God in the wilderness during that season. There are 3 things that they did all the time that were really unhelpful for their journey. And there are three things that I often get caught up with as well. The first one is whinging. They were really good at whinging. Whatever happened, they were whinging and whining and complaining and carrying on. If they ran out of water or ran out of food or whatever was happening, they would just complain. They never had a struggle and looked to God to see how He would help them solve the problem. They always had a struggle and just whinged. Now, I get it. I'm a really good whinger too. And if I was in the desert and ran out of water, I would be beside myself complaining. So, yes, I understand it. However, God always made a way. And rather than looking to God for a solution, they would just complain. And we get caught in the same battle where when things aren't working out, we just get stuck in this woe is me victim mentality. And we complain and complain to God. And we're telling the same stories over and over of how difficult our life is or whatever it is. And we forget to look to God for solutions and we just get stuck in a cycle of complaining. That doesn't help. The second thing that they did that didn't help was they kept saying, I want to go back. They kept, when something was hard, they would say, Moses, why did you bring us here to this terrible place? I just want to go back to Egypt. As if there was no problems back in Egypt. And we all get caught in that trap of wishing for the good old days before social media and before the world financial crisis and before COVID and before everything. The world was a better place, but it wasn't struggle free and it wasn't easy and we can't go back. There is no way to go back. So just constantly wishing for the past is not helpful when we are trying to get ourselves unstuck and moving forward. And the third thing that they did that was really unhelpful was listening to the wrong voices. So there was some influential leaders and they gave the people terrible advice. And rather than trusting God, the people listened to the bad advice. Aaron made a golden calf for the people to worship. They listened to the 10 faithless spies that said, no, we can't take possession of the land. They listened to the wrong voices, and that's what kept them stuck rather than helping them to move forward. So on the flip side, here are 3 things that I find really helpful when I'm trying to move my life forward out of a situation that's really difficult. First of all, knowing where you're headed, having a vision for your future, having an idea, a dream in your heart of what you want your life to look like. When we know where we're headed, we can put steps in place. We can take steps of faith to move towards the vision that we have. I love this. There's a passage in Mark where Jesus is walking into town and there's a blind guy. Bartimaeus was his name. And Bartimaeus, so he hears the commotion around him and says, what's going on? What's going on? And someone says to him, Jesus is coming. And Bartimaeus obviously has heard the reputation of Jesus. So he's yelling out, Jesus, Jesus. When Jesus comes over to Bartimaeus, Jesus asks this really interesting question. Jesus asked, what do you want me to do for you? Now, it might sound really obvious because Bartimaeus answered, Lord, I want to see. And Jesus gave Bartimaeus his sight. But Jesus didn't just assume, he asked the question, what do you want me to do for you? Because Jesus puts dreams in our hearts. He loves to give us the desire of our hearts. And I see that in the Gospels all the time, where Jesus sets people free, where Jesus lavishes his abundant love. And that is his heart for us as well. So spend some time, have a think. If Jesus asked you, "What do you want me to do for you?" What is the dream in your heart that you can say, "Lord, I want to write a book. Lord, I want to live overseas. Lord, I want to," whatever it is, have the faith and the courage to speak out loud the dream that God has put in your heart. Because when you have a picture of the destination of where you want to go, it's amazing how little faith steps can lead you along the way towards the outcome that you are looking for. Number 2, listen to the right voices. So rather than listening to the whingers and the naysayers and those who destroy faith, listen to people who are encouraging, who are inspiring, who point you to Jesus and make you more like him. Listen to those voices. The term influencer is a job description these days. And there's people trying to sell us products and philosophies and ideas everywhere you look. We are saturated. We are bombarded with people wanting to influence us. And we have to make choices to unfriend and unfollow and guard ourselves from the influences that are trying to take us off course and take us away from the plan that God has for us. Sometimes unfriend and unfollow is a really easy decision to make. Sometimes cutting off some of those influences or putting boundaries in place and limiting access from some people is a really difficult decision to make. Sometimes it's really hard, but having the wrong voices in your life can really set you off course. So make sure that the people that you are listening to, the people that you are being influenced by, are the ones that are helping you to move your life forward in the way that God is directing you. So listen to the right voices. And number 3, and lastly, ask for help. You don't have to do this alone. In fact, it's really hard to make big changes in our lives when we are in survival mode and struggling by ourselves. It's almost impossible to do it by yourself. There's been quite a few times through my lifetime where I have gone to see a professional Christian counselor to talk through a roadblock or a place where I am overwhelmed, whether that's in relationships or in my job situation or in my marriage or parenting or just my mental health. Just being able to go and to talk to a professional about what's going on and to receive some wisdom and perspective from an outside voice has been extremely helpful for me in lots of different difficult seasons of my life. But also just spending time with safe people that are able to keep my confidence and are good listeners and are wise people who can listen to what's going on for me and then help me to get perspective and ask me great questions and help me to come up with solutions that I wouldn't see by myself without talking it through. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 40, and it says, "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand." Whether it's a big change in our life or just little mindset shifts that we need to make, God doesn't want us to stay stuck. He will lift us out of the slimy pit and give us a firm place to stand. We do not need to stay stuck when our life isn't working. I know this to be true because God has done this for me again and again. Today's episode is based on one of the chapters in my book, The Burdens We Carry. It's available now. There's lots more detail and reflection questions and everything in there. I will put a link in the description if you're wanting to explore that further. Next week, we are going to look at the burden of busyness and how we can get stuck in this relentless race of busyness in our modern world, and God wants to set us free from that. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on next week's episode. And if this has been a blessing to you, I would love it if you could share it with somebody who you know who would be encouraged by what you have heard today. So until then, have a good week. God bless. Bye-bye.